Hello and welcome back. It's spooky season, which is why I'm wearing this shirt with a witch on it. And I decided that I could actually talk about a spooky book that I had read somewhat recently. I wasn't sure if I was going to review this one because I liked it a little bit too much. And sometimes people don't enjoy book reviews where the reviewer liked the book. But don't leave. Don't leave. We'll find plenty of things to talk about. It's not just going to be me saying I loved this over and over again. Because I do have stuff to talk about with this book, and it's been on my mind. Like, I read it a while ago. I read it in like August, I want to say, and I wasn't going to review it. But then A, it's spooky season, and it's like the only spooky thing I've read recently. And B, I keep thinking about it. It keeps coming back into my brain. So I think that's a sign that I should review it. The book is The September House. And before I read the blurb, I want to ask you all a question, all right? So this is going to be audience participation, okay? So get ready. I want you to answer me with your first knee-jerk reaction. I don't want you to go like hemming and hawing and if this, if that. I want your first reaction in the comments, okay? All right, the scenario is this. If you could own your dream house, whatever that looks like, whether it's, my dream Victorian mansion or your dream modern house in the city, whatever it is, your absolute dream house that doesn't have any issues that you need to fix. It's just you get to own your dream house. Except every September for the entire month, it is aggressively haunted. And you cannot leave for that September. You have to stay there. The hauntings are only mildly dangerous. Like, there's something in the basement that's definitely creepy. There are ghost children that will bite if you accidentally get too close to them. And blood does seep from the walls, and you can't, you clean it up and it seeps right back. So you just have to live with blood on your walls and floors. Oh, and at night there is screaming, so it does get pretty loud and a little bit difficult to sleep. All right? Now, knee-jerk reaction. Would you still own the house? Would you still get that house? Please comment below and let me know. If you want my answer, typical millennial that I am, my answer is hell yeah. I could adjust my sleeping schedule to avoid the screaming, or I could wear noise-canceling headphones. I could definitely survive the blood streaming down the walls, avoid the bitey children, and keep the basement locked. Nailed it, and I could even let people come and stay in my super haunted Victorian mansion as like a pseudo Airbnb during the super haunted month. I could be making money. But anyway, that is the scenario that this book initially poses to you. And now I will read the blurb. Like I said, I want your initial knee-jerk reactions in the comments below, okay? Okay, so the blurb goes thusly. When Margaret and her husband Hal bought the large Victorian house on Hawthorne Street for sale at a surprisingly reasonable price, they couldn't believe that they finally had the home of their own. Then they discovered the hauntings. Every September, the walls drip blood, the ghosts of former inhabitants appear, and all of them are terrified of something that lurks in the basement. Most people would flee. Margaret is not most people. Margaret is staying. It's her home. But after 4 years, Hal can't take it anymore, and he leaves abruptly. Now he's not returning her calls, and their daughter, Catherine, who knows nothing about the hauntings, arrives, intent on looking for her missing father. To make things worse, September has just begun, and with every attempt that Margaret and Catherine make at finding Hal, the hauntings grow more harrowing, because there are some secrets the house needs to keep. So, yes, we got a super haunted house, but only in September? And the blurb pretty much does a good job of summing it up. We got Margaret, we got Hal, we got their grown daughter, Catherine, who has moved out. I think she finished college. She's living her own life, but when her dad goes missing, she comes back to the September house to stay with her mother and try to figure out where dad is. The thing is that Margaret doesn't really care where her husband is. She thinks he's run off and she doesn't care. Now, the way that this book unfolds, I am going to be doing spoilers, by the way. There's really no way to talk about this book without them in any depth, so there are going to be spoilers. So if this premise sounds interesting to you, now's your time to go away because I'm just going to be spoiling everything, okay? Bye-bye. Those who don't want the spoilers. Now, those who do want the spoilers, high five, let's get on to this. All right, so The book unfolds information to you slowly. You are drip-fed a diet of information. So when we first meet Margaret, we don't know a lot about her, and we almost assume that she has a good relationship with her husband. But as the book goes on, we slowly learn that no, she did not have a good relationship. He was actually abusive to her. I think he was an alcoholic. Like I said, I read this book in August. But he was definitely physically and verbally abusive to his wife, and so she's not super sad that he's gone. She's like, great, that's fine, dream house to myself. Like, she is living it up in this Victorian mansion, as would I be. I too want an old Victorian mansion with no problems. Like, there's no wiring problems, there's no plumbing problems, there's no nothing. Aside from the haunting, the house seems perfect. Like, she just has to repaint a few things and it's good to go, which has not been my experience with home ownership. Maybe I should have looked into a haunted house, and that could be my main problem. Their daughter, Catherine, who does understand her parents' thorny relationship, but kind of is in denial about it, is like, why aren't you looking for Dad? We need to find Dad. And so she comes, and Margaret does not want Catherine to come. She's like, please don't come, especially in September. But Catherine is very pushy, and we find out that Catherine has suffered from some sort of mental issues. It's unclear what they are. I think she might have BPD, but I'm diagnosing a fictional character. But Catherine has had rage issues and huge reactions in the past, and Margaret has basically coddled her and let her have those issues. Anytime that Catherine has a big explosive temper tantrum, Margaret has folded, has given in, has let Catherine have her way. However, Catherine has been away from home. Catherine has been in several relationships, including a long-term relationship with a girlfriend or fiance, I can't remember, who recently broke up with Catherine because of Catherine's rage issues. And so Catherine's been going to therapy, and she's been dealing with some of her issues. So by the time she gets to Margaret and the September house, you actually see, though she's a difficult person, and like, I don't particularly like Catherine, the book does a good job of letting you see that Catherine has made the choice to understand that she is part of the problem and she needs to get her temper and her anger issues under control. So Margaret is expecting big explosions and Catherine is not providing. Catherine is clearly getting into moments where she wants to explode and like breathing through it and working on with the strategies that her therapist has given her. So we love to see it. Even though Catherine is a kind of unpleasant and difficult person, she's not raging out, she's not getting violent, she's not getting loud. I really appreciated that element to the story. And just the way that this author wrote these relationships and these characters feels very like true and flawed, and they're people who have a lot of issues that they're struggling with, some of which with help and some of which with not help.
Margaret herself might frustrate some readers, and she did frustrate me on occasion as well because she is extremely passive. Margaret is the human equivalent of a golden retriever with its head stuck in a chair. She's just like, she will tolerate anything and roll with anything. This woman, nothing really phases her, and you come to understand why, but especially in the beginning, you're like, what the hell, Margaret? Would you please have some kind of reaction? Would you please do something? Margaret kind of, for most of the book, lets things happen to her, and the things that she attempts to do are mostly to get everything back to the status quo where she doesn't have to do anything. If you are someone who gets overly frustrated by an intentionally passive main character, Margaret might drive you up the wall.
But Margaret doesn't want Catherine to come because Margaret, I think, in her heart knows what actually happened to her husband. And it is pretty easy to kind of figure out what probably happened to her husband, especially as the hauntings go on and it becomes more obvious that there is something really, really evil living in the basement. There are several ghosts, many of which are children who are varying levels of aggressive. There's one little boy who follows Margaret around and will bite her if she gets too close to him. She has a lot of bites on her, bite scars from figuring out how to avoid the children and stuff like that. There's a couple that I think the wife burned to death and they're still here in the house. There's a guy who like hanged himself in a closet and all he does it's chill out in the closet. So you open a closet and there's just like a ghost of a hanging man in there, but that's kind of all he does. Various ghosts, but there's clearly something deeply evil in the basement, and Margaret keeps the basement boarded up, but periodically she has to sort of redo it because the nails will start to work themselves loose. And so for a while I was pretty sure it was a demon in the basement. At one point she'd gotten a priest in, and the priest had a really scary encounter with whatever it was, which involved the priest like vomiting up flies and then fleeing from the house and then dying. So yeah, it does not go well for him. So I'm like, I think there's a demon in the basement. I was incorrect, but it seemed very demon-y to me. It seemed like there was a demon in the basement that was holding all of the hauntings here, but that's not what it was. I don't think I can go much further without telling you what this book is actually about, because like most good horror books, it's not actually about like the plot and the story. It goes deeper than that. A lot of horror is actually about grief. We've seen it many, many times. Famously, so many horror books are about grief, and it's understandable. This book, I like that it takes a different angle. This is a horror book about abuse. Because we learn that Margaret was abused by her husband and kind of abused by her own daughter a little bit. Margaret is one of those people, and this is so relatable, who feels that they both like deserve the abuse, and also that if they can just figure it out, if they can just figure out the rules, then they can avoid being abused. So that's what she did with her husband. She's like, I have all these rules to be around him to minimize the abuse. And same is with the house. The house represents an abuser, and Margaret believes that if she just figures out the rules to the hauntings, that she will just be able to live her life happily here forever. You see the parallels? You know, she should not have to live in a house where once a month ghosts bite her and they're screaming all night so she can't sleep and blood on her walls. You know, it's a lot of things that abusers do, keeping her awake, being physically violent, ruining the house so it's a giant mess. But Margaret thinks that since she has learned the rules, she can avoid being abused. But of course, just like with, you know, your garden variety abuse, the house does escalate, especially once Catherine gets into the picture. And Margaret, another metaphor for abuse here, Margaret did the same thing that she does with the house when her daughter was young. She shielded Catherine from her father's abuse until like the point where she couldn't anymore, and he finally attacked Catherine, and he only attacked Catherine once before Margaret was like, no, you will never do that again. So Margaret is just falling back on those old habits. She's doing the exact same thing with the house. She's trying to hide the hauntings and hide the hauntings from Catherine because she thinks she's protecting Catherine, but really she's not. Because you think you're protecting your kids, but they know. And it turns out, you know, like I said, we're drip feeding information. It seemed like Catherine was oblivious, but actually she did know. And she resents her mother for staying with a man who treated her that way. But also that man is her father. There's a lot of complicated feelings going on in this story, but the parallels are really strong. And in many places, I think well done, although it does beleaguer the point a little bit too long for me. Like, the book goes on a little bit too long is my biggest complaint for it. But I do really like seeing a horror book take a different angle than grief, because so often they are about grief, and I understand why, and I'm not saying that's bad, but I really love it when a horror book takes something in a different direction. Like, that's why I liked that book that I read a while ago, Mr. Magic, which I wouldn't classify as horror exactly, but that also was telling a story within a story, or a story outside of a story. I don't know how you do it, but it was about something bigger, and this is as well. I will say that I feel like the plot of this did better than the plot of Mr. Magic. Like, this plot makes a bit more sense, just in general, but one of my biggest issues, like I mentioned, is that it goes on and on. Like, we watch Margaret and Catherine sort of going about their day a little bit too much. I was like, okay, I know what this book is about now. Can we get to the point? As it goes, and it goes, and it goes. And Margaret has a friend who is very obviously just a ghost. He's like, nobody else ever happens to see this friend. It's just a coincidence that the friend is never around when anybody else is around. And I'm like, that your friend is a ghost. Some of them are friendly. So yeah, I mean, that's what the book's about. And you just kind of watch as Catherine tries to investigate what happened to her father, and we slowly are drip-fed information about Margaret that expands our view of her world from this, and then we just keep expanding. We just keep finding out things to expand our worldview. So it's like we're looking through a tube, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until we can see the whole picture, right? Again, it takes a little bit too long for my taste. I'm like, I get it. Can we just hurry this up? The house, outside the house, will Catherine see this ghost or won't she? Them just doing their thing. Margaret going out of her way to try to cover for the ghosts. Like, a ghost will start some tea brewing in the next room, and Margaret will have to be like, oh yeah, I'm super forgetful all of a sudden. Like, she spends so much time covering up for the hauntings that Catherine thinks that she might be developing dementia, because she'll be like, oh, all the cushions in the living room are off of the couches and stacked up. Oh yeah, I did that because I stack cushions now. It's a thing that I do. So Catherine is like, Mom, I think you're it's real concerning what's happening to you, Mother. You seem to be displaying a lot of signs of dementia at this point, and I think I need to get you checked out. But this just kind of does that for a long time. And then finally, we of course has to face whatever's in the basement, because of course that's where Dad is. He's in the basement. It turns out that the thing in the basement, not a demon, but in fact the ghost of a serial killer who killed all of the other people in this house. Weirdly, like Catherine, whenever she touches one of the other ghosts, she gets a vision of how they died, a vision of their horrible, traumatic deaths. But she never actually sees the serial killer, I don't think. She has to figure that out on her own. Conveniently, all the ghosts killed in such a way as they didn't see their killer or something. I can't remember exactly how it was done. He's a super powerful ghost, super evil. The husband thought that he could take on this ghost, you know, typical macho guy thinking. He's like, well, I can beat up and boss around my wife, so why can't I beat up and boss around this ghost? So he went down there to fight the ghost and very much lost. So he's been dead down there, and that's where all the flies are coming from. And Margaret just boarded up the basement and has not been going down there. So like she knew in her heart of hearts what happened, but also she like didn't know 100% until she went down there and she had to see it and she had to face that fact. Then of course she has to face off with the ghost in the basement and, you know, her finally standing up for herself and her daughter against an abuser and to be like, no, this is my house. I shouldn't have to live like this. A big problem for me personally, and it's not completely this because Margaret does get to stand up for herself a little bit, but I wish that the ending had been done a little bit different, because the reason that Margaret finally stands up to the bully, to the abuser, to the ghost in the house is because that ghost starts to harm her daughter. And the same thing happened in the past. Again, the parallels. Margaret's husband could abuse her all he wanted, but the moment that he went after Catherine, that's when Margaret snapped and like took a stand and was like, no, you will not do this. So the same thing kind of happens with the ghost, but I really wish desperately that Margaret had been able to say, I don't deserve to be treated like this for herself, instead of having to have, I need to defend my daughter in there. I understand that this is a thing. This is very, very true to a lot of domestic abuse situations where the mother will not leave until her children are in danger. She's like, I can take it, or I deserve it, or like, I don't feel empowered to leave. The abuser has convinced me that I can't leave. Whatever, there's so many reasons why someone would stay in an abusive relationship. But when the kids finally are threatened, a lot of women will finally take action. And that was true in this book. And while I do see that as very true and parallel to the real world, I desperately wanted Margaret to be able to say, I don't deserve to be treated like this. Me. Nothing to do with my kid. You will not treat me this way. So I just wish, for me, I know a lot of people will probably disagree and prefer the way that the book does it, but for me, I wish that Margaret had been able to, for herself only, just be like, no, you need to stop now, ghost. And they defeat the ghost. I don't remember how. The way that they defeat the ghost is not the most important part of this story. It's obviously the parallels to real world issues and of course Margaret and Catherine and their relationship and their choice to stand up to a bully, basically. Take back her house. So those are my thoughts on September House. Like I said, I kind of came right down in the middle on it. I gave it 3 stars because I enjoyed some elements of it, but it did drag a little bit too much for me. And the ending for me, again, a lot of people probably will disagree on this, but the ending for me fell a little bit flat. I will also say that while audiobook narrators don't normally affect my enjoyment of something, like I can see past a bad narrator more easily than some people can, in this particular book, the narrator made the choice to make Catherine, the daughter, every one of her lines sound super snotty, like all the time. And I'd have to step back and be like, what's Catherine actually saying? And like, would I read this line the same way if I was just reading the book? Because I think part of the reason that I didn't like Catherine was because all of her lines were being read in this really bratty, like snivelly tone. And I'm like, that might be why I don't like Catherine as much. Like, obviously she's still written to be a difficult person, but like if some of these lines were read in a different way, I would be having a totally different mood about it. So that was an interesting choice. But yeah, do check out the trigger warnings before you read this book. Do not go into it without knowing what those are, especially if DV is something that you have experienced. If you would like to check out a supernatural thriller written by moi, you can check out my book, Second Floor. It is a novella, so it's a super quick read. So if you're looking for something else kind of haunting-esque, it's not really a haunting, it's something else, but haunting related, with a big found family cast of characters, check out Second Floor. But that's all I have to talk about today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see all of you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time. Bye!
Good news, everyone!
It's patron time. Airy 925, Indigo Marmot, Choco Tina, Adriana, Laura, Wanda, Clara, Lisa, Jen, Tex, Moon Island, Zenith, Ashley, Corey, Bunny, Nemo, Tactical Hotdog, Haley, History Nerd, Pixelizzy, Raya, Christina, Cameron, Lady Kragan, Jose, Lunar Muse, AJ, Marshy, Semi-Dark, GK Scout, Annika, Jen, Tina, Laknanga, SB Boots, Martha Baggins, July, Bird Anonymous, Sarah, Kat, 78 kilograms of shade, Veda, Ingrid, Roma, Haley, Sam, Kira, Mooney, Pudamancer, Kohikaro, Kirsten, Bear, Jojo Bookish, Robin, Ursula, Caitlin, Jessica, KJ, Mufflier, Celia, Neon MVM, Deborah, Swamp Goblin Waifu, Sophia, Merween, Kit, Light Julie, Patrick, Callison, Vampire Antihero, Shelby, Jesper, Rennie, Scribbling Cat, Savvy, Jenny, and Amanda. Thank you all again so much for being my patrons. You keep the lights on around here.